In a nutshell, these talks that we're doing, we're going to continue to do them. So thank you for coming to the first one. Tracy explained it a lot. We're building an organic editorial committee that comes straight from the people to let us know what types of things you want us to cover. So tonight I want you to keep one thing in mind, one theme in mind, and that is what does the city of Baltimore look like when the people have the power, when it's being actually run by the majority of the citizens of the city? Because we do believe another Baltimore is possible. So tonight what we have some of our staff here, just so you know who does what in case you want to direct certain comments, or even if you have certain questions you want to direct towards certain individuals. And I'll let them introduce themselves, but to my right is my co-host tonight, Jacqueline Lukman.
Thank you very much. Very quickly, I am a new contributor. Better? All right, great. I'm a new regular contributor to the Real News Network, and citizen journalism is what drew me to the Real News, because I used to watch the Real News before I started contributing. Because we all understand that the media has a narrative that it pushes especially about certain people. So when there's a news outlet that exists that tells the stories that you're not hearing on the 5 and 6 and 11 o'clock news, and it's telling the stories of people, that's really important. So that's the background I come from. I covered the DNC convention. That was my first kind of citizen journalist kind of foray, where I was out in 106-degree heat in Philadelphia being mad at the Wells Fargo Center, raising my fists at them stealing the election from Bernie Sanders. And the appreciation people had for regular people being outside of that convention hall, telling the stories that wasn't being picked up by major media, was what sparked in me, wait, this is the work. So I'm glad to be here tonight to hopefully facilitate this conversation between people that the stories are supposed to be about and the media that is supposed to tell the stories of the people.
And sitting next to her is our executive producer, also former Black Panther and political prisoner Eddie Conway.
All right, thank you. Like my interest in this right now is to give the voice to people down on the ground so that we can have some direction, so that we can also play a supportive role in the things that you have an interest in. And so we hope tonight's dialogue will allow you to share with us your concerns about the stories we need to be doing, and your concerns about the direction that we need to take our network organizing in terms of reporting the news that impacts your life. In addition to that, I'm hoping that this becomes a regular thing that happens every 2 weeks, and people can come together, they can network, you can meet other people. You may be able to form alliances and allegiance that would allow you not just to gain support for the things you're doing, but gain support to make changes over in City Hall and ultimately make changes down in Annapolis.
And on the end here is our senior editor, Paul J.
Hi, welcome everybody. First of all, this series that's happening is partly supported by a foundation called the Bertha Foundation. And it's not a normal foundation. They support some of the more important progressive work that's happening around the world. So I want to thank them and Susan, who's here. We're doing A lot of people ask, why'd you come to Baltimore? Real News started in Toronto, went to Washington, and then moved to Baltimore. And the reason we came to Baltimore is because we think Baltimore is one of the places where there could be a breakthrough of a kind of people's power. A majority black city, a city where the median income is about $40,000, but poverty is far more than that figure represents. Surrounded by a county where the median income is $66,000. So local television news is all directed at the county. And the consequences of poverty, one of which is the violence that takes place, a murder rate over 300, 350 a year, which is more than New York City, or almost the equivalent of New York City, a city 13 times as big. On local television news, it's just another number. The murder rate in Baltimore is a crazy crisis, but it's become a norm. It's become acceptable. As is poverty that has been chronic for 50, 60 years is now just normal. It's considered just part of the landscape. It disappears into the background. So we think Baltimore is a place where the majority of the people have a real interest to take over. Take over in a way that may not be possible, certainly in some bigger cities, or cities where you don't have a majority of the population that so need change. So we wanted to go and do news for people that need change the most. That's why we came here. Second, we're heading towards the 2020 elections. It's kind of around the corner. These elections are absolutely critical, not just to the fate of Baltimore, they're critical to the fate of humanity. We are facing threats to our very existence as a civilization. Now, let me caveat that. The caveat of that is this isn't much of a civilization because it's not very civilized. But what we're facing is worse. The climate change crisis is, we have a matter, hopefully, of 12 years, they say, but that's 12 years if we begin right now. And really, we should have begun 10 years ago. The elites, the billionaire class that rule this country, more or less rule most of this world, they are so focused on their short-term orgy of profit-making that they don't really care that what most of the people of the world are going to face over the next few decades in terms of climate crisis. So we want a conversation with people that are willing and ready and help. We help facilitate to take over at the city level. But it's not just climate. We're facing a dire threat that almost never gets talked about because it just seems so overwhelming. But the possibility of accidental nuclear war is very serious. It never gets talked about. The financial crisis of 07-08, all the ingredients are there for it to repeat itself. But instead, corporate media is talking about Russiagate. So we're facing very serious issues that will very directly affect the people of Baltimore. And the local issues that people are already engaged with, there's a lot of solutions out there, but most people haven't even heard what those solutions are. Like we've been doing work on community control of the police. Not community review of the police, community control. What does that look like? So we want to do news, analysis, stories that relate to people in Baltimore. We want to use these sessions to engage people in giving us feedback on how we're doing. What do people want to know? And at the end of tonight, at the end of these sessions, we want people to actually give us assignments. What story do you want us to do? And we'll take the best of those proposals and we're going to do them. And then we'll bring them back and we'll bring one of them back in 2 weeks. And we'll keep bringing stories back for people's engagement. Here you've got 4 journalists that work on Baltimore stories, including those of us up here. So we're hoping you'll tell us what concerns you. Tell us the kind of journalism that would help not just talk and expose about how we got here and why it is and what's so bad. We have an internal thing we say. Criticism and exposure is not enough. We need to also talk about what do effective solutions look like. And then we're also going to involve city councilors and state legislatures and federal Congress people as well. Engage them in this conversation directly with us, and especially those that are promoting policies that seem more effective, more progressive. And hopefully between now and 2020, we can help facilitate a broad citywide conversation that ends up with people voting in 2020 for policies that actually change the situation. Because, we at the beginning, I guess it was Easy said this phrase, another Baltimore is possible. Well, maybe one of the biggest problems in Baltimore is most people don't believe that. More or less, people think this is the only Baltimore there will ever be, except maybe it will get worse. And if that's what most people think, that is what will happen. It will get worse. So we want to, there really are visions for policy that could make things better, but people have to get engaged with it, and then have to get organized, and then have to vote and run. People running for office, it has to change who's running. And then as journalists and as a news organization, we want to help facilitate this process. So thanks for joining us, and I hope you all weigh in on what concerns you, what kind of journalism would help, what would you like to see us do, what kind of solutions would you like us to report on, and then we will bring these stories back here for your review. Did we do a good job? Did we screw it up? What's missing? And this interaction is for real for us. We want you to act like an editorial committee. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. All right, so we're going to get into the meat and potatoes of this event. But before we do that, I just want to introduce to you real quickly our journalists that we also have here. We got my man Jezel Noor, who does a lot of our education reporting. Darna Noor, next to him, she covers climate change and environmental issues. Stephen Janis covers a lot of Baltimore politics, in particular police corruption. And then Taya Graham is on the end, who works closely with Stephen, but also does a series called Hidden Victims, where she covers the voices of women, in particular women of color, whose voices have been silent, whose issues have been silenced. So if you have any direct, questions in those areas, you can direct them to them. But we're going to open the floor now to you all, and we want to hear from you.
Now, the question that I have, and it's sort of rhetorical in a way, is that when Paul J. said that about the people taking control, well, what people are there? Who's going to take control? Because see, right now, Baltimore is not bad for everybody. There are some people where Baltimore is fine for them. So I'm thinking about if we was to have this venue somewhere in West Baltimore, where the audience is a lot darker, more people of color, more poorer people, how would that conversation be then? Would we ignore it? And it's the same way if it was in East Baltimore. So when we say about people taking over, what kind of people? Because Baltimore is not bad for everybody. And so we have to understand that there are some people that the status quo is fine. So now we go to the point where, how is it when we talk about, when the young lady right here said about urban blight, how is it that we're in a city that had been ruled by Democrats for decades? And how is it that a democratically ran city for decades can leave so many people behind? Right now, for the interest of time, I will open it up. But I really think that that's the question, because we simplify our politics too much. We say, well, okay, the Democrats are the good ones and the Republicans are, are the bad ones, or they don't care about the poor. But how is it in a city like this where you can't really blame too much on the Republicans? How is it that a democratically controlled city can leave so many people behind? And I'll just leave that question up there.
That's a great point.
Okay. Let me address the first point, which is we are located where we are, and we may take this east and west, but we have talked about ways to provide free transportation. So we're going to figure out a way for East and West Baltimore, working with local community organizations, to provide free transportation. Second of all, we're not going to let someone's income decide whether they could eat here that night or not. So if someone can't afford to eat, we're going to make sure they can. So it's very important that the class composition of who comes to these sessions, it's very critical. So I'm glad you raised it. It's an important point for us. Before I talk about the Democrats, I do want to, although these two things link with each other, the issue of blight and the neighborhoods, it starts with a fundamental principle on what is, if you're in city government or state or federal, but let's start with the city, what's your objective? Is your objective to make these communities livable for the people who have lived there for decades and generations? Or is your objective real estate speculation? Is your real objective to get poor people the hell out of Baltimore so that you can gentrify? That's one starting place. And a whole set of policies develop from that assumption, and that has been the assumption for decades. You know, blight and poverty and the destruction of neighborhoods was a deliberate policy. It was not some accident. And it wasn't just because something happened to the economy or deindustrialization or white flight. All of that is part of deliberate policy. But Baltimore has the possibility of being a very valuable real estate market, and that's what drives municipal politics. So when we say we have to, a better Baltimore is possible, it's only possible if people take power and change the underlying objective of the policy. So if the starting point is how do we make these neighborhoods livable so people can stay, which also involves how is more employment created. I mean, these things are all interconnected. But then obviously, even in the short term, you would at least make them look better. But you don't want to make them look better if you actually want people to get the hell out. And yeah, this is under a Democratic Party administration. Why? Because the leadership of the Democratic Party machine, and not all the city councilors, and certainly not all the people that consider themselves Democrats, but the people that control the machine are all tied up with the real estate industry and developers. And I remember when we were building this building, one of the guys we bought the building from, who's a developer and investor, he was complaining about the $10,000 lunch. That if you want to be a developer in this city, you need to sit down with city councilors and wink, wink, nudge, nudge, after lunch, make a $10,000 contribution to their campaign. Well, it's not just Baltimore. The whole system is riddled with this kind of corruption. So we do need to think about short-term solutions, even like prettifying the neighborhoods, and it does matter. But we need to think about something bigger, which is how to end this chronic poverty, and to take on these questions in a more fundamental way. And I think it can be done. But we have, people need to start to see what this would look like, so people will fight for it, because it ain't happening without a big struggle.
Let me respond first to you and then to the sister over here. If you look at that promo, what you see is we went to communities. We go out to communities We'll continue to go out to communities. We hold town halls out in those communities, but we also want to create a gathering spot here. And we'll do all those things in terms of providing transportation to do that. But we will continue to go out, right? But in terms of the blight, and I agree with you, I'm involved in a urban farm down in Gilmore Homes, Tubman House. It's our project. We just took the land. We took the land, we cleaned it, we put new dirt on there, we planted food, we brought young people in, we taught them how to raise food, we gave them the food for their families. Uh, we got volunteers, some from the Real News, but some from all over the city to help us. You just have to do it. And I agree about the art, but the art is only important if you can transform the landscape. In other words, if you take that empty lot, if you take those areas and you put something constructive down there and you stay there and work with it, then it will change the idea of blight. Because, and we got Freddie Gray pictures all around where we are, but the pictures are good, but building an alternative, building another possibility, fighting against the food desert, letting people understand what their power is, letting people understand that you can take something that's been discarded and create something positive. We can do that. 2, 3, 4 people can do that in their own neighborhood when they get ready to do it.
Let me just add
Awesome.
one quick thing. Like, for example, who is the biggest, maybe not largest, but I think it's the largest, but certainly one of the largest? Who owns most of the boarded up houses in this city? The city. So why isn't the city hiring people to renovate those houses and turn them into low-income housing? I mean, it's too obvious. Because they don't want to, they want poor people to get out. But you could get rid of tons of boarded up housing with small investments, giving people jobs who live in those communities, train people how to renovate and do these things. It's not a hard thing to figure out if that's actually what you want.
All right, we got some more? Yes.
Is this mic on? Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you. My name is Issa Olufemi. I'm here representing the Black Running Organization.
Yes, sir.
I need someone here to help me investigate where the opportunity is. I've spoken to people in City Hall. I've spoken to the Community Engagement Office on North Avenue in terms of Baltimore City Public School. I worked in education for 10 years. Everyone involved in my organization works in education. We can't seem to locate the opportunity, though. I came across an article recently about the mayor granting an opportunity to a young man by the name of Davon Fleming, who won.
He's a singer. Yeah.
The singer, correct. But the article was about how that opportunity raised eyebrows because the gentleman didn't have the background to implement that type of program, although he was awarded the funding. So I inquired about that type of opportunity or application to receive the same opportunity, and I was redirected to Baltimore City Rec and Parks. When I spoke to the people over there, they were telling me that they already had a track program, this, that, and the other, but I keep getting redirected. So I'm hoping, I'm asking, is someone here willing and available to help me investigate, number one, why I'm being redirected in terms of opportunity, 2, where the money is, and 3, also to expose racism in running. Baltimore is a running town. Runner's World magazine just did an article about why Baltimore is segregated in regards to running. And we have some insight into why that is. And we're hoping that someone here has the time and is willing to help us expose the lack of opportunity in the city and also racism in running.
Steven, you want to speak to any of that? Or hold on.
I mean, you know that the city council established a youth fund that takes 3.5% out of city tax by charter that is supposed to address that kind of thing directly. Have you been able to
Yeah,
access?
we applied in partnership with Friends of Patterson Park, and we were denied.
So you were denied?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And did they say why?
No, the email that I received gave a brief explanation stating that there were so many applicants and basically you were denied. And again, I don't have any gripes with that. I'm sure that a lot of people applied, and
Yeah.
again, if you're not a runner, right? I'm speaking to several principals and schools who want positive programs to change the culture in their school, but if they're not a runner, they can't really see the value in it.
Well, because it's interesting because the city imported this program called ROCA. Have you heard of that program?
No, sir.
And it was a program from Boston, and almost immediately the city was able to raise multi-million dollars from foundations like the Able Foundation to fund it,
Right.
which we all thought as reporters at City Hall was kind of interesting because this program was run by a white woman from Boston.
Uh-huh.
And so it strikes me that, from our experience working at City Hall, that, you have to know, it's almost like it's very similar to the development game, right?
Uh-huh.
That you have to be connected politically, have donated money to a number of politicians, and subsequently have access to people like Catherine Pugh or Jack Young on the city council president level.
Well, see, that sounds like corruption.
Well, I agree. I'm just, you asked me, I'm just telling you what
Right.
we learned as reporters, and you were absolutely right.
Right.
That process, just like when Paul was talking about the vacant homes,
Mhm.
For example, the city has funded tax breaks in what they call the white L versus the butterfly,
Right.
to primarily white developers. Tay and I are doing an investigation of that.
Right.
And this cycle, which excludes you,
Mhm.
continues to reinforce many of the same patterns of poverty and wealth that have made this city so, has created many of the problems in the city.
Mhm.
And it continues. And, the best thing I can tell you is that you should reach out to Jack Young. I
I've
think
sat
so-
in community action meetings. So let me reiterate my question. Is someone here available and willing to help me investigate and expose the corruption, the lack of opportunity? I've met with everybody I could possibly, anybody who you can
Excuse
recommend
me.
you meet with. Excuse me, sir, 1 second.
Oh.
Anybody you recommend I could meet with, I've met with already. What I'm asking is there's someone here because I've been sitting here since 6, hoping that the event started at 6. It didn't. My fiance's making dinner at home. Can I get my point across, please, sir? Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay.
gonna say yes.
Can I? There's racism here.
Saying we will assign with someone.
Okay, but what I'm
to
trying
work
to
with
finish,
you.
I'm saying, how are you saying you're going to bring the news to the people and you won't even let me finish my statement, sir?
I said we will assign someone
My
to work with
question
you.
is, you wouldn't let me finish my statement. Let's address that. You understand? So it's very difficult, right? It's very difficult for us to get to the issue if we're having these type of issues. So here's my question. Is anybody here available to help me investigate and expose the corruption that we're talking about, the lack of opportunity that we're talking about?
Can I answer?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I'd definitely be interested in talking to you more. We'll exchange information and go from there.
Thank you.
Can I answer?
Please.
I'm the executive editor, and I'm saying yes.
Okay.
You're asking for someone to work with you to expose the corruption in how this job market works and these job programs work. So the answer is yes. So after this tonight, come talk to me, and we'll figure out who here will work with you. But the answer is very much so. We're very interested in this.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I was also going to add to that because one of the things that I'm going to be doing is looking at doing stories on groups in the city that are doing community work with the little resources that they have, but then also looking at why they have to provide these services in communities, which sounds a lot like what you're doing, right?
Absolutely.
And when you talk about runners, you're talking about physically running, right?
Yeah, we're talking about
so,
distance
so
running.
yeah, I mean, from my perspective, it should not be so hard when the mayor is a runner.
Correct.
She gets up every morning at 5 a.m. and goes running, right?
Correct.
So yes, you got that help. At least one of the three of us.
Thank you
got
very
that.
much,
Yes, sir.
everyone.
And let me just Good. I know you got to run.
I
'cause
want
know
to
your
make
hands
sure
up.
I want to make sure the crowd gets to talk. So
Yeah.
if we can up here keep our comments as short as possible, so that the people that come here have a chance to talk, that would be great. So who else has something they want to add? Yes, sir.
I guess feeling what he was saying, I guess my point is getting jobs and money back into the community, just like this lady right here was talking about the blight. Now, I have history because my father was born and raised here. I don't know if y'all, everybody's familiar with East Baltimore. I live on Biddle. So I see the gentrification happening with Hopkins and everything coming in. I've been here since '84. My father, his grandparents bought the house that we are in back in the early 1900s. So we've been in that same house since the early 1900s. We've owned that house. That house has been passed down to me. So I've seen everything from, my parents have seen from the riots back in the 60s where the neighborhood never recovered. I've seen back in the early 80s, I've seen the drugs come in, the epidemic. I used to see people lining up out the back of the alley. So this is where everything started to crumble. Now that Hopkins comes in, they're coming and redoing all the boarded up houses, but then they're going for the mid 250s. The average person that was in my neighborhood can't afford that. Then you come in and our taxes get raised, everything else, and that's another way to get us out. So all of it, I see all of it. I see now the greenery and all the stores and everything that we should have had. But how do you get to piggyback off of you? We have to get a boost in people. Give them something to work with. We can brighten it up. We can fix it up all day long. But if we can't afford it, if you're not giving me a better way of life, what else is there for me to look for? I'm looking for a way where I can feed my family and keep from living paycheck to paycheck or worrying about whether I'm going to be homeless today or tomorrow. We got to have something else, especially with the drug epidemic and everything else that's still there. I mean, it saddens me because when I'm actually in a passenger seat of the vehicle, that's when I actually look at what's truly around me. When I get in my car and I'm driving, I'll work out in the county. So I don't literally, I think if I stopped and really took a look, it would keep me depressed as what I see, because I feel like I'm looking at The Walking Dead. That's what we have, no sparkle in our nothing, no hope of any kind. So in order to solve that, the money, we have to change. I'm sorry, I'm at a loss of words. But we have to bring in something that's actually going to change something. Don't sugarcoat it. Don't put something over top of it. Fix it at the root.
What does that
education
solution
is poor. Our schools are bad. We don't have the basic to get us to where we need to be.
So what would you like to see in terms of the kind of journalism we do, and what kind of solutions should we be reporting on? Like, what can we do to help?
You can take a minute and think about it.
Basically, report, right, more information and report the truth. Don't sugarcoat it. Don't make it seem like something that it's not. Get to the nitty gritty. Call a thing a thing. It is what it is. Just like the gentleman spoke on racism, it is what it is. We are a very segregated city,
Right.
very segregated. So, and things happen, and it's all because of that. So if that's what it is, call it what it is, and let's work on fixing that. You got to face facts. You face it head on. Just like, and granted, we have been a Democratic ran city. We've had black mayors. Nothing has changed. What are they fixing? They fix up the harbor.
Right.
They fix up certain areas. But do they come to my neighborhood? No. My neighborhood, my block, was my family. My uncle lived across the street, my aunt, my great aunts lived next door. I knew everybody in the whole block. But then when the elders died off, the drugs came in, the houses got condemned. I done seen it completely change. I have a picture from my block back in the early 60s where, granted, it was all black neighborhood, but we took pride. in our neighborhood. We came out and they came out every Saturday, clean their steps. We had flower pots, everything. But then everything came in to destroy us, to gentrify, I guess, to what it is now. But like I said, if you're gonna report on what it is. It is what it is. This is what happened. Report the true history of the reason why things are the way they are, and how can we address them and fix them. Because if you don't get to the core of the problem or the root of the problem and face what it is, we're never gonna fix anything. We're never.
Thank you very much.
And sorry, did you say you're on East Biddle? And so that is in the Hopkins sphere of influence. And so there's been a lot of programs and promises made in that area. And I'd definitely be interested in following up with you as well, because we're going to interview Antero Piatella about his new book, Ghost of Johns Hopkins. But that was like a deep dive into the influence that Hopkins and other organizations have had in your neighborhood and other neighborhoods, and helps try to explain how we got to this point. But getting your perspective, I think, would be invaluable as well.
I think this
So
gentleman-
I'm 23, so I'm with the younger generation, the ones that's dealing with the problems now. I feel like a lot of things that are looked at as issues, like the dirt bikes, it should be a place where they can ride dirt bikes, so it's not street problems, or they're not getting hit off bikes, or it's things like that. I feel like it's nothing for my generation to do. Like, it's not the club scene anymore, like where it was dancing and things like that. We're kind of losing our culture, or everything that we did is kind of, just getting just washed out. Nobody dances anymore. It's all about the drugs and the flash and everything like that. It's not about, just love and compassion anymore. And I grew up on that. I grew up on Harford Road and 25th Street, and that's not how it was when I was growing up. And I'm only 23. I could used to go outside and play, and all the kids knew each other, and I knew everybody's grandmother and everything like that. And now it's a zombie town. But I also was educated out in Arundel County, so I see the difference. Like, I went to school out there, so I was coming home to Baltimore while I was seeing my friends live in all these estates and, things like that, driving Mercedes and things. Not saying that that's necessarily what we need to have, but it's a difference. Like, coming back to Baltimore after being out in Arundel County, you feel different. Like, you feel like, you're just a part of the problem. And when you're walking down the street now, the cops just automatically think you're doing something or anything like that. It's not cops sitting around out in Arundel County. It's not cops on the block. It's not nobody watching what you're doing and nothing like that. Like, teenagers was able to be teenagers, and they did things like teenagers, and I feel like it's nothing for my generation to do. It's nothing positive for them to do. So all they have is the drug dealers that have the money and the cars and the bling, because the people who was actually trying to do right, they don't, really have anything to show for it, I guess is what I'm saying. So if it can be like some type of way that you can like publicize that they're not really bad, they're not really drug addicts, they don't have nothing to do. That's what it is for them to do.
Yes.
That's all they see. So
Can I ask a question?
Yeah. But real quick, yes, there is a way we can publicize that, because that's why we're here. That's our intention. We need to hear from you what it is you're not seeing in the media being told about you. That's what we're here for.
What happened to the places where you used to dance?
Shake and bake is not shake and bake anymore. Shake and bake was like a big thing. The Paradox is shut down. Like, the Hammer Jacks is not at there. Like, we had places to go, like, on Saturdays, and clubs that was just for teenagers and things like that. And it's not places like that. And I feel like dirt bikes are not really as big of a thing as it's made seem. If you give them an area in Drew Hill Park where they be on Sunday, then it could be organized. It wouldn't be them riding up and down the street, blocking off the whole street to do something. But I don't feel like they're in trouble. They're causing trouble while they're doing this. So I feel like things like that, it should be a solution. And
Would
not
you
be
help
a
us do
problem.
a story on this? Yeah?
Yeah.
Easy? Easy
Yeah,
to work with you on
I'd
that.
love to work with you on that. As somebody who grew up, and I'm a huge fan of Baltimore club music in particular. I grew up going to Shake and Bake. I actually covered Shake and Bake's reopening last year. So yes, definitely.
Thank you.
Got one here, one there. Hi. That was actually a very good segue into my comments. So we've talked a lot about the blight. We've talked a lot about what we need to do to bring income back to our neighborhoods and that sort of thing. What we want to see happen as the older generation, right? But I think when we start calling spades spades, we need to accept that we, the people in this room, may not see the change that we want to see. And if we're not going to be here, and we know that we're not going to be here to see the change, who are we focusing on? Who are we focusing on engaging? How are we engaging them? And in what are we engaging them? So, are we giving our young people places where they can gather with their friends, where they can socialize, where they can let off steam, where they can ride their bikes? Absolutely, we need that. But are we giving them real educations? Are we educating them about their finances, about credit, about how to own homes, about how to pool finances and resources and buy homes together? Are we talking to them about how they don't need a college degree and a good government job? Are we talking to them about how to pursue their passions and turn them into and monetize them? Are we talking to them about how to take an entire neighborhood and own it? Your people that look like you. I think that we need to focus heavily on that portion of this problem, which is engaging our young people in ways that empower them past the system. So there's no system out here that can tell an entrepreneur that is out here solving a problem that they are not going to make it. Because if we have a problem, we're going to pay you to solve it, right? So if we can, I think that I would like to see you cover opportunities for that recreation that you were talking about, places where they can gather, let off steam, just be teenagers. But I'd also like to see us cover those opportunities that are turning our young people into scholars, and not scholars in a university, but life learners, into young people, into professionals that are looking for vocational opportunities. So I'd like to see us report on those opportunities for the recreation, opportunities for vocational training, opportunities for financial education, and that sort of thing. So if we could do that, I'd be absolutely willing to get on board and do whatever I could to help.
Awesome. Thank you. Yes.
Sorry, that was a little
definitely.
long-winded.
This gentleman, yes.
I'm Leonard Soa. I live in Baltimore City, but closer to the county. One thing that I find very strange is that I own my own, but my tax rate is actually twice what my colleagues, once I walk across to the county, pay. And I don't understand. I lived in Howard County, where the schools are better, and you get a lot more services. We in Baltimore City pay more taxes per house, there's a home that's in value than all those counties. And we still do not have good schools, we don't have good services. Why do we have to pay more and get less? And this is something that we need to figure out. Why should we pay more and still get less?
That's a great point. I mean, as somebody, I spent my senior year in high school at Wild Lake in Columbia, and that it's a total difference. And partly Columbia is a newer city that I think it's only like 30 or 40 years old. And when it was built, there were certain things that they established from the beginning that Howard County, Columbia has kind of stuck with. But Baltimore City seems to be struggling a lot with that.
Baltimore City is one of only 3 cities in the country that is not actually incorporated into the county that surrounds it. And from our investigation into the tax break system that funds much of the development in the already wealthy areas, that is a purposeful policy to economically isolate, the city of Baltimore. And one thing you have to realize is that we spend more money, twice as much money on policing as we do on education. And policing also creates a fixed cost basis of about $700 million. So the residents of this city fund law enforcement and attended public safety services to about $1.2 billion a year, which are predominantly people that live in the county, about 80%. So we're pretty much caught, I think, in a purposeful trap to a certain extent. And what exacerbates that has been the ongoing policy to give tax breaks to county developers who come in here to build, like i.e. Port Covington and Harbor Point, who don't pay into the tax system. And they are balkanizing the tax system and making it worse. And on top of that, they have created a pilot system, which is a payment in lieu of taxes, which has been given out to dozens of developers. All the new apartment buildings you see will be tax-free for 10 years. So we are in a really, really nationally unique situation, and most of the money that you spend either goes to fund police pensions or policing. And to the point about rec centers, the city used to have 120 rec centers in the early 90s, one of the best sort of ecosystems of recreation centers in the country. And the city consistently defunded it under Martin O'Malley while policing was being exponentially funded. So we have gone from 120 to about 30 in under a couple decades. So it's a purposeful thing. I mean, the people who work here as police officers can leave in 25 years with a full pension for the rest of their lives and live out in Carroll County or wherever. And it's a great sort of wealth extraction mechanism that I think is going to mean that we're going to have high taxes forever.
If I could just add on to that, the white middle class was built through New Deal programs that African Americans couldn't be part of. A huge amount of real estate in this city is owned by nonprofits, whether it's hospitals or other groups that don't pay into taxes. And what Stephen was talking about, Baltimore is one of a handful of cities that in Maryland, the state of Maryland actually stopped Baltimore from annexing territories in the county. And when white flight happened, you had wealthier taxpayers that benefited from federal programs and city programs to get in the middle class to be able to purchase homes, leaving the tax base. And obviously the city is very old. We pay more for the services and the infrastructure that other counties that are a lot newer don't have to pay in. You look at the school system here; those schools date back from the 50s and 60s, and the costs that other systems don't have to pay for. The biggest determinant of a school success is socioeconomic background. We have the highest concentration of students living in poverty. Students told us about being afraid to get to school every day, dealing with trauma inside the school, outside the school, at levels that no other jurisdiction has to deal with, and that all costs money. Baltimore is the 4th highest spending school district in the entire country when it comes to large school districts. And so, people often point that out, like how is Baltimore spending so much money on schools and getting these same outcomes, right? We're like among the lowest as far as test scores go in the state. And a big part of that is the challenges that come with poverty and mass incarceration and all these issues that no one else has to deal with.
Hi, my name is Sharmini Pires. I'm the senior editor here at the Real News Network, and I don't want this evening to go by without some very interesting and important work that Stephen Janis and Taya Graham have been doing in terms of people that have been murdered while in custody. I think it's been some very groundbreaking stories that they have been doing. And, I, of course, consider it award-winning work. So I want to make sure that everybody in the room watches it, but I wanted to call on Taya to ask her to speak to the investigations that they have been doing about the coroner's reports and the death of many people in custody.
Thank you so much, Charmaine. I'm Teo Graham. This is my reporting partner, Stephen Janis. We have been working on a series taking a look at the medical examiner's office. What we have discovered through our investigations is that the medical examiner's office is another area where police are able to avoid accountability. And when I refer to accountability, that means for police brutality, police misconduct, and deaths in police custody. One of the people whose lives that we investigated, his name was Anton Black. He was a 19-year-old young man who lived on the Eastern Shore. He had just walked New York Fashion's catwalk. They have a New York Fashion Week, and he had just walked the catwalk, and he had visited his mother back home in Greensboro, Maryland, on the Eastern Shore. When he did, he encountered an officer named Tom Webster. Officer Tom Webster had been cited in Delaware for 29 complaints of misconduct. The community in Greensboro, Maryland asked for this officer not to be allowed to be placed on their police department, but the all-white city council did. And so when young Anton encountered Officer Tom Webster, started a chase that led to this young man's death. The Maryland Medical Examiner's Office ruled his death an accident. So what we did was Stephen called Dr. Cyril Wecht, who is another medical examiner who is famous for his work on concussions for football players. And we asked him to review the body camera footage, and we asked him to look at our medical examiner's autopsy. And what he saw was that Anton died from positional asphyxiation, which is what happens when sometimes it happens during a riot. Sometimes it's known as a riot crush or traumatic asphyxiation, when someone presses their body on top of you and you are prone on the ground. And we did a little bit more investigation. We found that this is not the first case of positional asphyxiation that our medical examiner's office has ruled as an accident. And so even though we are looking for solutions, we have to expose what is going on. We have to diagnose the problem. Part of the problem in this case with the medical examiner's office is that police officers were allowed in the autopsy room to guide the medical examiner as they made their notes. I'm going to give my reporting partner an opportunity to speak on this, but this is the type of work that we do. I've spoken with Anton's family at length. I'm so sorry. If anyone's interested, they're known as the Coalition for Justice for Anton Black. And we're going to continue our investigations into the medical examiner's office. We've been speaking with Tawanda Jones at length, whose family has also dealt with the medical examiner's office allowing police accountability to slip by. And we're going to continue our investigations until we can finally get some change in that office.
That's great.
So thank you. We got one back there. Yes.
How y'all doing? All right. I just been hearing everybody talking, like she said, like I just turned 31 on March the 10th. So I came home from the hospital to 1905 Holland Street on Hollins and Monroe. And we live right across the street from a fire station, and it was the Enoch Pratt Library on my corner on Hollins and Payson. And I remember after school, me and my cousin used to go to that library every day because they had story time, different activities and things like that. But by the time I was 6 years old, that library was shut down. So it was nowhere in for that neighborhood for all of us kids to go anymore. And we moved down the street on Fayette and Smallwood, right down the street from Bon Secure Hospital. And I went to Bentlow Elementary. And in Bentlow Rec Center, I was on the step team. My cousin was on the basketball team. They had arts and crafts. Our school had a band. I learned to play the trumpet that I got to take home and everything. And I had people in my neighborhood where we all would get together to practice. They had their trombones, their clarinets, and things like that. And now that I'm older, none of that's there. Bentlow Rec is not what it used to be. And I know Brother Issa, the one that was telling y'all about the running organization that was just here, I know him through an organization called PLM. And what I think that we need to do is to bring those kind of programs back, like they said, to give the kids an alternative. Because when they come home from school and like you said, they just see that people on the corner selling drugs, you're going to be a product of your environment. So until we can give the kids alternative things, bring music programs back, I think that we should do fundraisers to put money in organizations like PLM, like BRO, these organizations that are already here and have kids in them that are doing things, changing the way that kids, because PLM has an organization called UYIP. My daughter went to their African culture summer camp where she learned Swahili, she learned African dance, and Brother Issa from BRO was teaching the boys African drumming. So I think we need to change the culture of Baltimore from the drug gangster culture and get more into like African culture and more on self-love, self-pride, teaching these kids to see each other as brothers and sisters and not enemies on the street. So I think the solution, instead of us just, because we all know what the problem is, they coming in trying to turn out city for white people and kick all the poor black people out so that way it can be gentrified to make money. And for us to stop this, I think that Stephanie said that she was doing this thing where the city can't hold a house for more than 2 years or something like that, and then it goes back on the market. If we do get funded, we need to be buying these houses and turn them into places for kids to come and be creative, get an art program and let the kids go and paint these boarded up houses just to give it a better aesthetic moving forward. And giving them people like Easy or Issa, like brothers, positive male role models in their life in these programs that can help them to think differently, see differently, and do different things. So I just think if we focused on fundraising for programs that are already making a difference, because I know PLM was trying to get into the school by McMicken, like you know that Save a Lot over there on McMicken. He had an after school program in there teaching the kids about African history, culture, and their grades were going up. And so he asked could he do his own curriculum, but of course according to Baltimore City curriculum they couldn't, and they wound up kicking him out the school. When he was getting those boys, the fights went down, they were communicating more, they were speaking different languages to each other, and they put him out of that school. These are the kind of programs we need to be funding, the kind that are actually showing that these kids are doing better in these programs and giving them music programs, step teams, dancing, football, basketball, other things to do than to just sit on the corner and get into trouble with each other and sell drugs and do all this unnecessary stuff. You know what I mean? That's what I think. We need to just fund the things in the city that's already working instead of figuring out what new things we need to do. You know what I mean? Because these people are underfunded. And if PLM and UYP had the funding to have a after-school program for the entire city, they could change the way these kids are because they already get them out of gangs, get them calling each other brother and sister, mama this and baba this for the elders, to respect the elders. The principles and the way we think has to change first, and we need to start with these kids when they're young. So that's
Absolutely.
my little 2 cents.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Taisha. I want to ask you, do you think that it would help from our standpoint if we were to start doing some stories that, because we do it, we're guilty of it, right? We get these great, beautiful shots of the abandoned houses and the buildings in our stories and stuff. But I haven't seen anybody really talk about the history of some of these buildings. Like when you talk about the library, when we always talk about all the rec centers. I know several rec centers I grew up going to that are not, that are basically empty buildings now, or they've been turned into something else. Do you think it would help to kind of tell the history of those buildings in these stories and really go and try to find, people like yourself who used to go to do these things and really paint that picture for people?
Yes, I do think. I think. Yeah, I think that would help.
Well,
We got a few more minutes.
We'll do a story on what happened to the rec centers. Because I remember at the time of the closing of a lot of the rec centers, the argument being given from the city is we're going to have less but bigger and better. Well, did we ever get the bigger and better, or we just got the less? So we're going to do a story on that. Can you help us? All right.
Yep. Anybody else? We got a few more minutes. Yes, sir.
I just want to say one thing.
Come on.
It's a terrible situation, and I know nothing, and I'm actually hopeless and pessimistic about everything. But what that young lady said, I think we should emphasize. There's so many things negative. There's lots of things, and we should fight all the negative things. But let's spend a little bit on what the positive aspects of the community are doing by themselves and emphasize that a little bit.
Actually, Easy, why don't you tell them you're part of your new job description.
Yeah, I mentioned it earlier when Issa was talking, but that's one of the things I'm gonna be doing is covering groups that are doing great work, right? Paul told me, Susan, about the group you working with that gives uniforms to students who can't afford uniforms. And we cover those feel-good stories. We cover those greats because there's so much great work going on in the communities in Baltimore. But then we turn the corner and we talk about why this work is so needed and why it's not being funded by the city, why the city is not already doing these things, So that's definitely going to be part of my work, and I'm excited to tackle that. And a lot of it's been confirmed in just stuff that has come up tonight. I gotta immediately write some of this stuff down because I got like 20 ideas going through my head right now. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Lynette. People know me as the old school Bruja. And I'm originally from New York, from Brooklyn, New York, and I'm a product of gentrification. And I've been here for 10 years. And I'm watching my neighborhood become what my old neighborhood was, where I was kicked out of it. My rent has been raised twice in the last 2 years. And I'm seeing that there's so many vacant houses. There's a dollar program that not many of us have access to. When I moved here, I was flipping houses here. I was taking those abandonments and restoring them and selling them. And who was buying them? White people. And that's why I got out of the business, because I'm not here to gentrify the neighborhood. I would like to see our people learn how to invest, how to rehab these homes, how to flip them so that way you can flip at wholesale, flip 5, 6, 7 houses, own one house, and still generate passive income. But our people don't know how to do that. And then you have people like these investors that come and they charge thousands of dollars. One tried to get me for $23,000 to go to their program to invest in the abandoned homes here. John Merrill, Fan Merrill is his name. He is on the radio all the time. And with that, you can teach our young people skills to rebuild homes. My daddy taught me how to rebuild a home. I can rebuild a home from the foundation up. And he said that's because you're going to be able to sustain yourself no matter what. And I think creating programs to teach our young people to rehab a home, to flip it, to be business people, to be business minded. How do we generate passive income so we don't have to be working the rest of our lives? Why do you think white people are retiring at such young ages? And here we are, 60, 70 years old, still busting our asses waiting for Social Security to come through. It's not fair. We should have access to that. Where is the dollar program? The mayor keeps posting. You see it on Facebook all the time. So where is it? But then you see developers coming in and now they want to tear down a ton of abandoned homes to rebuild luxury homes. This is New York all over again. I left New York because I couldn't afford it, and here I am rebuilding my life, and it's the same thing happening because now New York is filled with the genties. That's what I call them, the genties. So now they're moving their way down here. And in that, as we create these programs for young people to rehab these homes, as this gentleman said here, let's highlight the positive work that's being done in this community. We're highlighting negative things to bring light to those things, but what about the people who are working in the cut, deep underneath, one person at a time to make change? They need support. They need to be highlighted so they can continue doing their work, so that way they feel their community is supporting them instead of tearing them down. Thank you.
Can I answer this for a second?
Yeah.
Thank you, Lynette.
I just add to something I said earlier. We already own most of these homes because the city is one of the biggest landlords, owners of abandoned houses. So if the city has a program to train people to renovate, fix up these houses and turn them into affordable houses with city-controlled rent, that solution, it's there to be done. There's just no interest from the city in doing it.
Hello. Hey. unfortunately, you can't trust this city. You
You gotta
can't.
don't trust
Yeah.
it, take it over.
You can't trust them. You can't trust their programs. That's right. We have to create our own. We can't trust anything the city puts out there. We have to be able to get the support from our community, from community leaders who are honest and forthright, which is rare in this city, and start creating those programs. I'm sorry, fuck the city, because all they keep doing is fucking us over and over again.
So, I'm sorry. Let me, and I appreciate the comments from everybody. And what I really, really appreciate, because okay, look, can we be serious? This program is called Real Talk, though, and we're supposed to be calling a thing, and we're sitting here, everybody's being all polite, but let's be real. People are pissed off because their government isn't doing shit for them. So while I absolutely agree that part of our job at the Real News Network, part of what we want to do, part of our mandate is to highlight these stories of organizations like the brother who has the running organization and all these other organizations that teach these young black kids self-empowerment and connection to the motherland, because my husband and I are Pan-Africanists. So that's huge with us. We understand the power that comes with understanding where you come from and who you belong to. We also understand that this government has a responsibility that it's abdicated to care for some of its citizens. And we're not talking about trusting these people, because clearly we can. But what we are talking about is building a base of alternative power to push these people to make good on their promise, their alleged promise. So we get in a room and we highlight these stories. We get people who are the heads of community organizations that need funding in a room with people who have some money. And we tell those stories. This is what I do for this group of people, but we need some funding for some more uniforms. Then this person over here in the corner who has some money says, well, let me connect with you and let me see what I can help you do. That's what we can do on the community level. And that needs to be done in every city like this around the country. So that's what we hope to expand. We live in Washington, D.C. Trust me, if this works out, we stealing this idea. I'm just telling you. Because this is how you build power. You take something that works. Go look up Jackson, Mississippi and Cooperation Jackson and the work they did in that city. That can be done. A bunch of people in a poor community in Jackson, Mississippi started with their own farms, built a collective, started growing their own food, and the next thing you know, they were running their own candidate for mayor, who just happened to be the son of the former Pan-Africanist candidate for mayor who started that program. It can be done, and it can be done here. We can do both. I believe we can do both. We can do both in Baltimore. We absolutely need programs like the lady in the back talked about with the house flipping. Yes, we'd like to talk to you personally to know how to do that, to know how to access those systems, because we wondered where the dollar program was. So we need to get people in a room like this to understand that these programs exist, and we need to get our elected officials in these rooms to push them and make them real uncomfortable and ask them, what are you doing with these programs that you're advertising that none of these people can access? And it has to, but it can't be just we're coming out every other Tuesday night to talk about these things. We have to also organize and mobilize. So once we confront community officials, we've got to organize call-in days to their office, where everybody in the community is calling them on their phone, blowing up their office line, filling up their voicemail, going to their office, showing up on their lunch break. Hi, remember me from Real Talk, though? And all of my 17 neighbors who want to know about why you're not funding the community program. It's all that work. So I appreciate the frustration that I heard from the young brother who had to leave. I appreciate like the despair and the hopelessness that you were honest about. And I appreciate like the lack of trust that you have in our government. All of that is exactly what we are trying to harness to actually change the system on a local level, community by community, and then in Annapolis, and then we'll see what we can do about 2020 and beyond. But we got to start right here.
And real quick, I know a lot of people were talking about an urgency around vacant homes and doing something with them. How many people here have heard of the housing roundtable? Housing roundtable. So 2 years ago, groups had been working for years to get the city to actually rehab and invest in the vacant homes, because as we said, the city owns a lot of those properties. And that was on the ballot, and it got approved by the majority of voters in 2016. So everyone voted for that. Last year, it came to the attention of the folks that helped get it passed that the city hadn't invested a single dollar in it. So they went back and got like thousands of signatures and eventually got the mayor to agree to actually start investing money in that program. So it's been happening. It's a process. I don't know if anything's come out of it yet. Yeah, so they're starting to fund it.
Well, it includes money for rehab and includes money for affordable housing. And it was called originally the 2020 Fund, but they didn't get the full $20 million, but they were successful. They went into City Hall, petitioned, marched in City Hall, and we covered this process extensively. Yeah, we've all covered it, and it has been successful. And they want to establish community land banks, which is a very good way to take and process that property to put it in a land bank to let communities, and with a community board to decide what to do with it and who it should be given to, and to raise money. So it's a positive.
And in addition to that, for the folks who are concerned about the lack of programs and resources for kids to learn about this kind of thing, and also things for kids to do positively, one of the groups that backed that initiative, called United Workers, is now working with a high school in South Baltimore, in Curtis Bay, to teach kids there about the issue of vacant homes in their lands. And kids are gathering after school at playgrounds, calling up a bunch of people who own, like investors who own a bunch of different houses in their neighborhoods, to be like, hey, what's up? Why haven't you sold your home yet? What's up? What are you doing on this, like with your house? You haven't done anything with this entire block of houses, and now my neighborhood is rotting because you haven't done anything with this. So I think that there's ways that we can push for that kind of like community justice and community control in ways that create like not just recreation for kids, but like for ways that can actually like push kids to push the city and to push others to really make change.
And the community land trust model is something that's been working across the country, where the community owns the land and the property, and they basically let community members live in there for a very low amount of money, and it's wealth that's built up in the community and not given to an investor and not taken outside of the community as well.
All right, so that brings us to the end of our very first Real Talk Though session. Another Baltimore is possible. Thank y'all so much for coming out. Give yourselves a round of applause.